Hey team, Coach Ben Sauer here again. Today I'm going to go through boxing fundamentals in a way that you've probably never seen before. It's a method that I've sort of come up with over the years from studying boxing and trying to make the fundamentals apply more realistically to what you actually see when you watch a boxing match. This is video that's not just going to be beneficial for beginners, even though I recommend all beginners watch this. It's also going to be beneficial for more experienced boxers who want to have a better understanding of what sitting on your punches mean. I know that most people think when you think, oh, the pros sit on the punch, that it just means they immediately drop their legs. There's a little bit more to it than that, so we're going to go through that. It's going to give you a deeper understanding of how weight transfer can benefit your shots, and it's also going to teach you a little bit more about how to create torque using both legs rather than just the one-sided method that you usually get taught as a beginner. So when you first go into a boxing gym and you start to learn to box, we tend to compare throwing a punch to throwing a ball. It's the way that most people get taught to start with. It's the pivot of the foot, the transfer of the weight over to the side, the triple extension of the ankle, knee and hip, and then the separation as we almost slingshot a punch. The problem with teaching a punch in the same way that you throw a ball, although they are similar, is the fact that there's two things to consider when throwing a punch that don't need to be considered when you're throwing a ball. And number one is when you're throwing a ball, it doesn't matter where you end up. It literally makes no difference. You can just put 100% in, launch that ball and end up in this position. It doesn't really matter. Whereas when you're punching somebody, you obviously have to consider what's coming back at you. So you need to maintain a position where you can defend yourself effectively. And also, what's your next move from an attacking perspective? It's all well and good throwing it as hard as you can and ending up in this position, but what's your next punch going to look like? It's just going to be a messy affair. So although there are similarities when we're talking about throwing a ball to throwing a punch, it's not exactly the same. And today I'm going to go through a method of punching that's going to help you be in a better position for both continued offense and continued defense afterwards, while still generating maximum power, which usually the standard way of teaching doesn't really apply to that. And also, I'm sure more experienced boxers will also agree with me on this one. A lot of the stuff you get taught at the beginning of your boxing journey doesn't really get used later on. Like once you start boxing, like I've spent years looking at boxing and going, well, 90% of the stuff that I got taught, I literally never see. Now, it's not to say that it's wrong. Like, I still teach a beginner in the exact same way I got taught to punch myself. The reason that I do that is because it's a great way of teaching somebody that a punch is not just an arm movement, it's a whole body movement. And also more experienced boxers, I have all my experienced boxers doing warm-ups that involve exaggerated rotation and that, just to get their body moving freely so that they don't end up with any tight spots, which can obviously affect power too. So without further ado, let's get started. Right then, so like I said, try and forget for now everything you've ever been taught about how to throw a punch correctly. So the reason being, when we talk about weight transfer, if we're throwing that punch and we're collapsing at the core, we've shifted our weight over, effectively what we're doing is not using weight transfer to increase the weight of the punch, we're using the weight transfer to increase the speed of the punch. We're kind of cancelling it out. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to be a good punch. It just means that it's like, it's that one hitter quitter style punch. And the other thing is, when there's not much weight on the punch, a lot of speed can hurt somebody if it hits them clean on the jaw, because it's the point of least resistance. What you have to remember is, back to this, throwing a ball. When you're throwing a ball, the only resistance a ball's got is the air that it's in. Whereas when you throw a punch and you hit somebody, you've got the resistance of their body. And if you're not in a strong position to go through, a lot of your power can recoil off the body, which when you throw with that preloaded weight transfer and you're swinging like this, if I end up here, effectively what I might as well be in this position is here. And that means that if there's any resistance, if they're half blocking, most of my power will get lost in translation. So rather than transferring your weight forwards and then slingshotting the punch, what we're going to learn to do today is transfer the weight from a balanced position. So we're going to go from a one-legged punch to a two-legged punch. And what this is going to do is, one, it's going to help you maintain position to continue fighting, and two, it's going to prevent you from falling in and getting weight, just transferring weight unnecessarily to gain speed, and actually using that body weight behind the punch instead of in front of the punch to to gain more weight behind the punch, which when somebody does this, it's going to hurt them a lot more. They're going to, even when you block punch, I'm sure there's boxers out there, more experienced boxers who have felt they're naturally heavy-handed guys, where even when you block that punch, you're like, fuck, I don't want to take another one of them. Like, you just know that they could really hurt you if you catch hard. And that's the kind of punch that you guys want to throw. And it all starts with switching from that one-legged punch to a two-legged punch. So, the key mistake that a lot of people make, when you're getting taught, people get taught something like that as a cross, like almost a forwards movement. When they're throwing a hook, they tend to dip over this way. When they're throwing an uppercut, they tend to come up. And you're constantly losing position where you're just throwing yourself into the punch, which, like I said, one punch you might throw a good shot, but throwing continuous punches, so you're not going to be able to throw combinations, and your punches are only going to be really heavy, or really damaging to your opponent if they hit the jaw. So this is the way that I think that you should be teaching and learning how to do your fundamentals to generate more power. So setting up your base with good connection on the ground, roughly 50-50 or 60-40 on the back foot, depending on how you feel comfortable. Now, this is the goal. When we're throwing a cross, that should be the movement. Yes, I know that your head needs to go off center line. We'll get to that later on. When I'm throwing a hook, that should be the movement. When I'm throwing an uppercut, that should be the movement. There's no difference. If you've got different mechanics for every single shot, you're never going to be able to connect the dots, and I'll explain why this is going to aid your weight transfer soon. So, this is all I want you to practice to start, is practicing the rotational movement, cross, uppercut, hook. And this applies on both sides. Jab, hook, up. You've suddenly got yourself in a perfectly balanced position. This way, when I finish that punch, I'm in a perfect position to come back with another punch or to roll, and I can continue boxing. And obviously, if I'm moving forwards, I have to try and do that while stepping. So, the reason this helps with power, instead of getting your power from throwing your body weight in, when you've got a two-legged base, you can now create more torque, which is going to put the weight behind the punch instead. So rather than just pivoting and twisting, which everybody knows I'm completely against, when I want to get my weight from here to here, when I normally twist, I need to put a little bit of resistance on this, but also to get the weight over, I need to push. So push, pivot, and then resist on this one so that I'm not collapsing over onto it. So it's a very subtle weight transfer. I drive through to there, and then I can do the same in return. So I'm getting torque, but it's a push and a pull. It's not just a push. It's not a one-sided affair. I'm using this side to pull, this side to push. And that way when I punch, I'm going to generate far more power because my weight now is behind the punch that I'm throwing. Boom. There. It might not move so much, but it doesn't need to move much. Weight transfer is not about how far the weight moves. It's about how much weight is behind the punch. So when I turn here, I'm going to be able to send that punch through. Not only that, as long as I've kept the torque and kept that little bit of tension through that lower body, I'm now going to be able to drive and return the punch back on the other side. So that way now, that is exactly what sitting on your punches. People think of sitting on your punches just being this. It serves no purpose. It doesn't really add anything to your punch. It's about engaging your lower body and learning to punch with your whole body. And this applies to both amateurs and pros. People think, oh, amateurs need to be light on their feet. Go and watch your favorite amateur boxers hit the pads, and you'll see them go from here to there. They sit and they create torque through the hips and slingshot their punches rather than transferring weight and collapsing and throwing themselves all over the show. Now, the next step up from that is learning to jab your way into range and still have your hips underneath you. If you get these two parts right, that torque through the rotation and learning to punch yourself into range without losing your feet, you've basically mastered the fundamentals of boxing. If you've got those two elements, you can box and you're never going to be out of position. And that way, then you can start experimenting with bigger punches where you're willing to lose your shape a little bit to land a bomb. So, when you're practicing your shadow boxing, make sure you're practicing throwing your jab in a way that you're bringing your back foot with you. You might be driving off it, but then it has to come up behind. That way your hips are underneath you. And then practicing getting torque by pushing and pulling so that your weight is going behind the shot instead of in front of the shot. Now, back to that part what I said about head off the center line. So yes, your head needs to go off the center line. This is how I think that head off the center line should look. One, if I push hard enough, my head's moved halfway anyway, and then all I need to do is a little shift of my hip, drop my knee slightly, let my head drop a little bit further. You don't want to throw your head off because you've immediately relaxed here, which means that my lower body again is no longer creating torque, and I'm not in that good position where I'm using my entire body and that entire kinetic chain to generate power. So in saying that, when we're talking about slips and rolls, when you throw a cross, that would be what a cross looks like. When I slip, same mechanics to start, with a little bit of a dip of the leg just off center line. Now, if that's still not enough, then we can start doing that. But we don't want to lead with the head. Don't want to lead with the head to start with. You want to throw that body forwards, turn through, and then just that little bit more if you need to, just to make sure you're safe. And this way I've still got that coil loaded that I can move into my next shot, or I can move into my next defense. Same applies with a roll. I can roll. You don't want to relax. You don't want to relax here. As soon as you've done that, you've switched your entire kinetic chain off. You want to keep a little bit of tension through that body at all times. Throw that right hand. I can drop, come back up, reload. You can see that tension's there, so that I've constantly got my body loaded and slightly tense, ready to explode at all times. That, guys, is fundamentals, how they should be done, so that you're balanced all the time. Their weight transfer is now transferring the weight behind the punch rather than in front of the punch. And that way you're going to be able to be a better combination puncher. You're going to be more compact, more balanced, and you're going to punch harder. Hope it helps, guys.